This is lesson 354 in Classical India, the Maurya and Gupta Empires. Overview. Let's talk about Classical India. The Maurya and Gupta Empires both flourished in India. They were not the only empires to exist in India during this time. However, they were the two most powerful and influential empires from the Indian classical period. Both the Maurya and the Gupta empires were both primarily Hindu empires. However, Buddhism also thrived during both empires. The Maurya Empire is much older, and it ended about 5 centuries before the Gupta began. The Maurya Empire. Look at how aggressively the Maurya Empire expanded. That's a lot of purple. Who was largely responsible for such expansion? And this expansion was between 321 BCE and about 185 BCE, depending on how you want to count it. Kautilya. Kautilya had actually been Emperor Chandragupta's advisor, and he was of the Brahmin caste, and that was the highest Hindu caste. He wrote a book called The Treatise on Material Gain, also known as the Arthashastra. And it was a guide for helping the king and his ministers to rule wisely. It supported royal power and authority. And in it, Kautilya identified the greatest evil in society as anarchy. Anarchy is a situation in which there is no authority to enforce laws and keep order. And therefore, a single authority is needed to employ force when necessary. Let's start with Chandragupta, who ruled from 321 BCE to 298 BCE. Chandragupta Maurya was the first Mauryan emperor. He unified northern India, and he managed to defeat the Persian general Seleucus. He divided his empire into provinces and then districts for tax assessment and law enforcement. He feared assassination, so he kept food tasters around, and he slept in different rooms all the time. In 301 BCE, Chandragupta Maurya gave up his throne and became a Jain. Jainism is an Indian religion that puts a strong emphasis on non-violence. And that brings us to Asoka. You can call him Ashoka, you can call him Asoka, it doesn't matter. And he lived from 304 BC to 232 BC. Ashoka was the next major Mauryan emperor, and he dedicated himself to expanding the Mauryan Empire. This is the cover of an Indian film about Ashoka's life. You can watch it on YouTube if you want to rent it. Asoka had a religious conversion after witnessing the horror and death at the gruesome Battle of Kalinga, which was a territory that he was trying to annex in 262 BCE. He dedicated his life to Buddhism. He ended the Mauryan policy of territorial expansion. Asoka went on regular tours of his kingdom called Dhamma tours to spread the word about Buddhism. And he sent Buddhist missionaries, including some of his own children, as far as Greece to spread the message of peace. Asoka also built extensive roads to unify the empire. Conflict. How do you balance Kautilya's methods of keeping power and defending against anarchy with Buddha's demands to be a selfless person? You can see Kalinga right there on the southeast. That's where the battle was. Ashoka's edicts. Asoka had a law code that was issued in the form of what are called edicts. And these edicts have been found scattered in more than 30 places in India, Nepal, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. They were written mostly in the Aryan written language of Sanskrit, but one was actually in Greek and Aramaic. Some of these edicts were carved into rocks and cliffs. Some were carved into pillars. Each pillar was called a stupa, and it was 40 to 50 feet high. These edicts document Ashoka's reaction to the Kalinga War, and Ashoka's Buddhist principles dominate his edicts. Here's one of Ashoka's stupas right here. Women under an Asoka tree. The end of the Mauryan Dynasty. King Ashoka died in 232 BC at the age of 72, most likely of natural causes. And the Mauryan Dynasty lasted another 47 years until the Mauryan ruler, Brihadratha, was assassinated by his military commander-in-chief. And the Mauryan Empire then fragmented. This caused an era of turmoil and power vacuum that lasted over 500 years. And eventually the Gupta Dynasty emerged from this fragmentation. Nobody is completely certain of the Gupta's origins. However, Chandragupta I, king of the great kings, was much more powerful than his predecessors. Turmoil and fragmentation. 220 BCE to 319 AD, or depending on how you want to measure it, 185 BCE to 319 AD. The Mauryan Empire during this time was divided into many kingdoms. So the Gupta Empire lasted from 319 to 550. And we begin with Chandragupta I. And he ruled from 319 to 335. And he was known as the Great King of Kings. Next you've got Samudragupta, and he ruled from 335 to 376. And then you've got Chandragupta II, and he ruled from 376 to 415. And he fostered profitable trade as far as the Mediterranean, and this was also known as the Indo-Roman trade relations. And he oversaw a great Hindu revival. So, Chandragupta II and his Hindu revival. International trade routes during the Gupta Empire. As you can see, they go all the way to the Mediterranean. A lot of them go across the Indian Ocean to Africa and to the Red Sea, and then go up through Egypt. Extensive global trade in the 4th century. As you can see, spices are going everywhere. Also, gold and ivory are being traded. Cotton goods are being traded, as well as rice, wheat, horses, and silks. Faxian. Life in Gupta India. Faxian was a Chinese Buddhist monk who traveled along the Silk Road and visited India from 405 to 411. And the reason that he is important is because he was an eyewitness to Gupta India. He was following the path of the Buddha, and he reported the people of India to be happy, relatively free of government oppression, and inclined towards courtesy and charity. Other references in Faxian's journal, however, indicate that the caste system was rapidly assuming its basic features, including the idea of untouchability, which was the social isolation of the lowest class that is doomed to menial labor. Hinduism. In Hinduism, you have three main deities. You've got Brahma, and he's the creator and personified universal spirit of the Upanishads. Then you have Vishnu, the benevolent preserver god, and Shiva, the fearsome god of death and fertility. Myths of these gods were collected in the Puranas, the Bible of popular Hinduism. And in the Puranas, Vishnu has been reincarnated 9 times to save the world from evil, but the 10th time is still yet to come. Achievements and culture. Indian art is a religious art, Hindu and Buddhist. Cave temples of Ajanta are the most impressive surviving Buddhist art, painted on cave walls, most during the 5th century. Metal casting reached its height at this time, including an 80-foot tall image of Buddha and the Iron Pillar of Delhi. Writing was done on birch bark or leaves, for example, 1001 Nights. Family life was patriarchal, just like the Romans. Kalidasa. Kalidasa was the greatest of the Indian poets, and his most famous play was Shakuntala, and he wrote during the reign of Chandragupta II. Gupta art. Indian religion and culture had an explosive revival during the Gupta Empire. Gupta achievements. For example, in medicine, 1,000 diseases were classified, 500 healing plants were identified, and these were printed in medicinal guides. They had plastic surgery, they had inoculations, and they performed C-sections. And of course, in literature, you've got Kalidasa. In astronomy, you had a solar calendar, and they found out that the Earth was round. In mathematics, you had the decimal system, the concept of zero, and even pi. The end of the Gupta Empire. The Alchan Huns, also called the White Huns, invaded India, and these were a nomadic kingdom from present-day Afghanistan. They invaded the Gupta Empire twice and conquered vast amounts of India. The first time was in 496 to 515. Second time was from 520 to 535. And the Guptas were greatly weakened by these wars, and these invasions were extremely disruptive to Indo-Roman trade. And also these invasions allowed local rulers to rise up against the Gupta Empire. The Gupta Dynasty finally crumbled in 550, and this marked the end of Indian classical civilization. Indian urban culture declined, Buddhism was seriously weakened, many monks had been killed, and many Buddhist monasteries were destroyed. And India, once again, lapsed into turmoil and fragmentation. The decline of the Guptas, the invasion of the White Huns, the Alchan Huns, in the 4th century, signaled the end of the Gupta Golden Age, even though at first the Guptas defeated them. After the decline of the Gupta Empire, North India broke up into a number of separate Hindu kingdoms and was not really unified again until the coming of the Muslims in the 7th century. Question: is the best literature and art written as the civilization is on the rise, or at its height, or in its decline? The rule of Harsha. Harsha ruled northern India from 606 to 648. His father had driven the Alchan Huns out for good, and by this time the Gupta Empire was long gone. Most of our knowledge of Harsha comes from the journal of Chinese Buddhist pilgrim Xuanzang, also known as Xuanzang. He is a Chinese national hero. He visited India from 630 to 645, and a bond between him and Harsha led to ambassadors being exchanged between the two empires. After Harsha was assassinated, his kingdom soon fell apart, and the Muslims appeared on the plain of the Indus and began to settle around 712. The impact of Islam. An Arab army first conquered the kingdom of Sind in northwest India in 712 AD under the Umayyad Caliphate's general Muhammad ibn Qasim. Turks, who had been conquered by the Arabs, invaded and wrought havoc on Hindu and Buddhist institutions. Turkish Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni led 17 invasions of India from 1000 AD to 1027 AD, doing tremendous damage. Buddhism never recovered after the great university at Nalanda was destroyed. The Hindu caste system, as a result, became more rigid, and women began to wear veils. The Rajputs, Kshatriyas of northern India, fought back bravely but were defeated. And some lower caste Hindus even embraced Islam for the equality that it offered.